At the supermarket, my social climbing daughter-in-law told the cashier, "Don't talk to the old woman, she's the family's employee." My son just laughed until the cashier called me by my name, and everyone was left in shock by what I was hiding. I am glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you are watching me. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Eleanor, and I am 67 years old. For the last 5 years, I've lived in the home of my son Oliver and his wife Chloe, believing I depended on their generosity just to survive. Every single day I woke up grateful to have a roof over my head, even if that roof came with constant reminders that I was nothing but a burden. That Saturday morning started like any other. Chloe woke me at 6 in the morning with that impatient tone she had perfected over our years of living together. "Eleanor, get up. We're going to the grocery store and I need you to come carry the bags." It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. I dressed quickly in the most muted, invisible clothes I owned, exactly as she always demanded when we went out together. According to Chloe, I couldn't give off a bad image when accompanying her in public. In the car, while Oliver drove, I listened to the conversation that had become their daily routine. They talked about me as if I weren't even in the car, like I was just another piece of furniture being hauled from one room to another. "I don't understand why I always have to bring her along," Chloe complained, adjusting the rearview mirror to apply another layer of lip gloss. "It is so embarrassing that people think we're poor because she walks around in those ugly clothes." Oliver just shrugged, his eyes glued to the morning traffic. "She's my mother, Chloe. What do you want me to do? Just leave her home alone." "Of course not," she replied with a tight, forced laugh, "but she could at least try to look presentable when she goes out with me." I stayed perfectly quiet in the back seat, pretending I couldn't hear every single word piercing my chest like shattered glass. This exact conversation played out every week, with minor variations, but the core message never changed. I was a nuisance, a dead weight they were forced to drag around. When we arrived at Sterling Farms, Chloe shoved a shopping cart toward me and pointed where I needed to go. "Follow us, at a distance," she whispered, "and do not talk to anyone unless it is absolutely necessary." I walked behind them like a ghost, watching as Chloe filled the cart with premium items, imported hams, artisan cheeses, expensive wines, all paid for with the credit card that I had secretly been funding for years. While we waited in the checkout line, Chloe started flirting with the young guy bagging groceries at the next register. Her loud laughter echoed down the aisle, drawing stares from other shoppers. Oliver looked annoyed, but he didn't say a word. He just scowled and scrolled through his phone. When our turn finally came, the cashier started scanning our items. She was a young woman in her 30s, wearing a genuine, warm smile that completely clashed with the toxic air surrounding us. "What a beautiful day," the cashier commented as she dragged a bottle of red wine across the scanner. Chloe ignored her completely, but I offered a small smile and nodded. It was incredibly rare for anyone to speak to me so kindly when I was out with them. The cashier kept working, but every now and then she'd glance up at me like she was trying to piece a puzzle together. There was something familiar in her eyes, but I couldn't quite place where I had seen her before. As Chloe pulled out her card to pay, the cashier casually remarked, "What a great selection. These are really high-quality products." And that was the exact moment Chloe decided to put on her little show. She turned to me with that venomous fake smile she always saved for the moments she wanted to humiliate me in public. "Don't talk to the old woman," she told the cashier, her voice pitched perfectly loud enough for everyone in line to hear. "She's just the family's employee. She's only here to carry the bags." I felt like I had been slapped across the face. Heat rushed up my neck and burned my cheeks, and for a split second I thought my legs might give out. It wasn't the first time Chloe had humiliated me in public, but there was something uniquely vicious about the way she delivered the punchline this time. And Oliver, my own flesh and blood, didn't defend me. Instead, he laughed. A short, nervous laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. That sound tore through me worse than Chloe's words ever could. The employee the cashier asked, genuine confusion wrinkling her forehead. "Yes," Chloe pressed on, clearly drunk on the power of the moment. "Honestly, at this point, she's pretty much useless, but we give her room and board out of pity." "You have to be charitable to the elderly, right?" The cashier looked at me, her expression unreadable. There was shock in her eyes, but underneath that, something else was clicking into place. something that looked exactly like recognition. Suddenly, her entire face lit up. Mrs. Eleanor. Her voice trembled heavy with sheer emotion. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The world simply stopped spinning. It felt like all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the supermarket. Chloe blinked rapidly, her arrogant smirk freezing into a stiff mask. Oliver finally looked up from his phone for the first time all morning. "Yes," I answered weakly. My voice was barely a whisper. The cashier let out a gasp of pure joy and pressed both hands to her chest. "I cannot believe it. It is you, Mrs. Eleanor, the owner." Those words hung in the air like a live grenade with the pin pulled out. The owner. That word rang in my ears as I watched the blood drain from Chloe and Oliver's faces. "Owner of what?" Chloe demanded, her voice shaking just a fraction. The cashier looked at all of us with utter confusion, as if she couldn't fathom why the question was even being asked. "Well, of here. Of the entire Sterling Farms chain. Mrs. Eleanor is our boss." The silence that followed her words was absolutely deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears as I watched reality shatter across Chloe and Oliver's faces. Boss Chloe stammered, her voice shrinking to a squeak. "What do you mean, boss?" The cashier, whose name tag I now realized read Lucy, beamed a massive smile, completely oblivious to the hurricane she had just unleashed. "Mrs. Eleanor is the owner of every Sterling Farm store in the state. We've been taking training courses for years on how to treat her if she ever came in for a visit, even though we had never seen her in person until today." Chloe stared at me like I had just crawled out of a grave. Her face was chalk white, and her hands shook violently as she held her credit card suspended in midair. "That cannot be true," Oliver muttered, finally finding his voice. "My mom doesn't have any money. We support her." Lucy laughed softly, assuming it was some kind of inside joke. "Support her, Mrs. Eleanor? You are one of the most successful women in the state. My manager always tells us that if we ever see you, we are to treat you like absolute royalty." For the first time in 5 years, I stood up completely straight. I felt an invisible anvil lift right off my shoulders. The moment had finally arrived, the very moment I had been dreading and waiting for in equal measure. "Lucy," I said, my voice ringing out stronger than it had in half a decade, "could you please call the manager?" "Right away, Mrs. Eleanor," she answered eagerly, grabbing the intercom phone at the register. "Mr. Vance? Mrs. Vance is at my register." "Yes, the owner. Can you come up here, please?" Chloe just kept staring at me, her jaw hanging slightly unhinged. "Eleanor, what on earth is going on here?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer, a middle-aged man practically sprinted down the aisle toward us. It was Edward Vance, the regional manager. A man I knew very well, even though he had zero idea I had been living like an indentured servant in my own son's house. "Mrs. Eleanor," he gasped, clearly breathless at the sight of me. "What an absolute honor to have you in our store. Is there anything we can improve? Any issues with the service at all?" I turned slowly toward Chloe and Oliver, who were watching us like we were speaking a dead language. "No, Edward. Actually, Lucy has taken wonderful care of me," I said, keeping my tone perfectly smooth, even though a Category 5 storm of emotions was tearing through my chest. I just wanted to make sure she gets the recognition she deserves for her outstanding customer service. "Of course, Mrs. Eleanor. Lucy is one of our finest," the manager replied, pivoting toward my family with polite curiosity. "Are these friends of yours?" The question just hovered there, thick and heavy. Chloe was looking at me with a cocktail of pure shock and mounting panic, while Oliver looked like his brain was physically struggling to process the data. "They are my family," I finally answered. "My son Oliver and his wife, Chloe." The manager smiled broadly. "What a wonderful pleasure to meet Mrs. Eleanor's family. She is one of the most deeply respected businesswomen in the state. You must be incredibly proud of your mother, young man." Oliver didn't say a word. His eyes just darted frantically between the manager and me, like he was looking at a total stranger. "Excuse me," Chloe cut in, her voice trembling violently now. "But there has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Eleanor lives with us because she is broke." Edward looked at me totally bewildered. Then he turned back to Chloe with a tight, professional smile. I am afraid you are the one who is confused, ma'am. Mrs. Vance owns 47 Sterling Farms locations, along with several other corporate ventures. She is one of the wealthiest women in the country. Hearing those words spoken out loud, validated by someone else, triggered a feeling I hadn't let myself feel in years. Pride. A deep, bone-rattling pride for what I had achieved for the empire I had built out of absolute dust after my husband passed away. Chloe swayed on her feet, grabbing the handle of the shopping cart just to stay upright. But she doesn't pay for anything at the house. We buy her food, her clothes, everything. A bitter, sharp laugh ripped its way out of my throat before I could swallow it down. It was time they knew the truth. Chloe, I said, my voice colder and firmer than they had ever heard it. How exactly do you think Oliver has been paying the mortgage on that house for the last 5 years? Oliver went dead pale. Mom, what are you talking about? I am talking about the $5,000 that drops into your checking account on the first of every single month. The exact same $5,000 you pretend is your salary, but actually comes straight out of my personal trust. The silence was so thick you could carve it with a butcher knife. Other shoppers had started forming a loose circle around us, thoroughly captivated by the daytime soap opera unfolding at Register 4. That can't be true, Oliver whispered. I work at the development firm. My boss, your boss, is Marcus Hayes, I interrupted. An old family friend who agreed to give you a phantom job on paper in exchange for me injecting capital into his firm. You haven't worked a real day in your entire life, Oliver. Chloe practically collapsed against the metal cart, her knees buckling under the crushing weight of reality. No, this cannot be happening. Edward, shifting uncomfortably as the family trauma spilled all over his clean floors, cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Eleanor, would you like to move this conversation to my office, somewhere a bit more private? I shook my head. For 5 long years, I had lived in the shadows. I played a role. I swallowed my pride and endured endless humiliation because I truly believed that keeping my family under one roof was worth any price. But standing right here, right now, in the dead center of my own empire, being treated with the respect I had bled to earn, a fundamental truth snapped into focus. I was done hiding. No, Edward. I answered the manager, my voice like steel. This conversation needs to happen right here, right now. I have spent way too many years burying the truth. Chloe was white-knuckling the cart like it was a life raft. Her eyes darted wildly between the manager and me, desperately searching for a loophole, for any explanation that kept her world of lies intact. Mom, Oliver said, his voice quivering. If you have all this money, why have you been lying to us all these years? The question hit me like a closed fist. Lying. After every single indignity I had suffered, he had the nerve to accuse me of lying. Lying, I echoed, feeling the suppressed rage of half a decade finally boiling up into my throat. Son, I never once lied to you. You simply never bothered to ask. But you lived like a beggar, Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching up in desperation. You wore rags. You never went out. You never spent a dime. I didn't spend a dime because you two explicitly told me I wasn't allowed to, I fired back, my words cutting through the grocery store air like a razor. Do you remember, Chloe? It was you who said I couldn't embarrass you with my appearance. It was you who picked out my hideous clothes. You who dictated where I was allowed to sit and exactly who I was allowed to speak to. Edward and Lucy exchanged very uncomfortable glances. By now, a dozen customers had casually drifted closer, pretending to read the nutritional labels on cereal boxes while hanging on to every word. That is not true, Chloe protested weakly. We just wanted to help you blend in better. A dark, hollow laugh scraped out of my chest. Blend in, Chloe. 3 years ago, you forbade me from speaking to my own sister Claire because you claimed she was a toxic influence. 2 years ago, you confiscated my cell phone because you said my phone bills were too high. Last year, you told me I couldn't attend my best friend's funeral because the emotional toll would just be too inconvenient for the household schedule. Every single word pouring out of my mouth felt like ripping dirty bandages off an infected wound. I could literally see the memories clicking into place in Oliver's mind, his face twitching with every new revelation. But Mom, Oliver said, his voice dropping to a fragile whisper, You said you were fine with all of it. You said you understood. I said that because I honestly believed that if I played the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, the perfect invisible grandmother to your future kids, you might actually love me, I answered. Hot tears finally threatening to spill over my eyelids. I thought that if I just shrank myself down, if I made myself small enough, I wouldn't be a burden. Mrs. Vance, Edward interrupted gently. Would you like to sit down? Can I grab you a chair? I shook my head. I had been sitting down, staying quiet, remaining totally invisible for far too long. It was time to stand tall. Let me tell you a little story, I said, locking my eyes entirely on Oliver. When your father died 8 years ago, I was left with a tiny pension and the house you both live in now. What neither of you knew was that your father had been quietly buying up commercial real estate for decades. Chloe stared at me, eyes wide, as if I were narrating a ghost story. I inherited 6 commercial properties scattered across the city. At first, I had no earthly idea what to do with them. But then I remembered your father's lifelong dream of opening a grocery business. So I took those empty buildings and turned them into the very first Sterling Farms locations. That was 8 years ago. Oliver muttered, the timeline finally doing the math in his head. Exactly. For the first 3 years, I worked day and night, bleeding for the business, learning the ropes, expanding the footprint. By the time you and Chloe got married, I owned 20 stores. By the time you graciously invited me to live in your basement, I owned 35. Why didn't you just tell us? Oliver asked, his voice heavy with a profound, messy confusion. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as the math finally clicked into place. The house, the cars, the trips to Maui, the kitchen remodel, she mumbled in a trance. All paid for by me, I confirmed. Even that Louis Vuitton bag slung over your shoulder right now. I bought it, I wrapped it, and I put it under Oliver's name for your birthday. Chloe looked down at the designer leather like it was a coiled rattlesnake. That can't be, Chloe whispered, her hands shaking violently as she gripped the rim of the shopping cart. If you had millions of dollars, why did you let us treat you like garbage? The sheer audacity of the question hit me like a backhand across the jaw. After everything I had just laid bare, after half a decade of being treated like a stray dog, she was twisting the knife to blame me. Why did I let it happen? I echoed, feeling the molten rage I had swallowed for years finally bubbling over. Chloe, I didn't let it happen. I endured it. There is a massive difference. But you could have walked out the door on day one, she insisted, her voice climbing into a hysterical pitch. You could have moved into a gated mansion, abandoned us, and proved everything I always suspected about you. I cut her off instantly. That you only loved my son for the lifestyle you could squeeze out of him. Edward, sweating profusely from the radioactive awkwardness of the moment, loudly cleared his throat. Oliver finally dragged his eyes up from the floor, rimmed red and drowning in confusion. Mom, I don't get it. If you just wanted to test us, why didn't you just lay your cards on the table from the start? We could have built an honest relationship. A jagged, bitter laugh ripped from my throat. Honest, Oliver. From the very second you two tied the knot, Chloe has micromanaged my existence. She dictated what clothes I put on my back, who I was allowed to dial on a telephone, what rooms I was allowed to sit in. Do you honestly believe, deep down in your soul, that she would have treated me with 1 ounce of real love if she knew my net worth? That is totally unfair, Chloe cried out. I was just trying to help you assimilate into our modern household. Assimilate? My voice cracked just a fraction. Chloe, you banned me from having coffee with my friends. You told me I wasn't allowed to go to Sunday service because the gossiping church ladies would fill my head with crazy ideas. You literally confiscated my cell phone and claimed it was a budget issue. When the ugly truth was, you just didn't want me talking to a single soul outside those 4 walls. I could see the other shoppers now blatantly eavesdropping, abandoning their carts just to listen to the wreckage of my family. Edward looked genuinely paralyzed, torn between corporate protocol and absolute fascination with the drama unfolding in aisle 4. But we gave you a roof over your head, Oliver said weakly. We took care of you. You took care of me. The words spilled out of my mouth like pure acid. Oliver. For 5 years, I have slept in a windowless storage room in a house that I hold the deed to. For 5 years, I have eaten the cold leftovers of groceries that my money paid for. For 5 years, you have treated me like the hired help in my own property. That isn't true, Chloe mumbled, but there was zero conviction left in her voice. No, I calmly pulled out my smartphone, a new one I had discreetly purchased months ago without their knowledge. Would you like me to read aloud a few of the text messages Chloe has been sending her girlfriends about me? The remaining color completely vanished from Chloe's face. You do not have my phone. I don't need your phone. One of the beautiful perks of owning a massive corporate retail chain is that you have a very wide network of loyal employees. Like, for instance, your best friend Laura's younger sister, who just so happens to work in my corporate HR department. Chloe's eyes blew wide open in unadulterated terror. The old bat is getting more insufferable by the day. I began reading directly from the glowing screen. I wish she would just drop dead already so we could sell this dump and move into a real neighborhood. Oliver looked like he was going to vomit. Chloe, didn't you promise me there was more? I kept reading, my voice slicing right through her pathetic whimpers. I am so sick of faking a smile for her. She's gross and her room smells weird. Oliver is just too much of a spineless coward to dump her in a nursing home. Stop it, Chloe shrieked, black mascara tears streaming down her face. Those texts were totally private. How exactly was it private when you broadcasted to your entire social circle that I was a mental drain on your fabulous life? How was it private when you literally told Oliver's own mother that you were secretly touring assisted living facilities because I was too much of an eyesore, Mom? Oliver whispered, his voice shattering into pieces. I swear to God, I never knew about those texts. No. I locked eyes with him, unblinking. And what about the time Chloe convinced you it was best if I didn't attend your own cousin's graduation because my outdated clothes would embarrass your brand? And what about the night you both agreed it was best I skipped Thanksgiving dinner because I wouldn't know which forks to use? Oliver opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish, but no sound came out. Every time you compromised, Oliver. Every single time you chose to pacify Chloe instead of defending the woman who raised you, you made a choice. You don't get to stand here and play the ignorant victim. But I thought you were fine with the arrangement, he mumbled miserably. You never complained once. When the hell did you ever give me a safe space to complain? I fired back, feeling a half-decade of suffocation finally breaking out of my lungs. When did you ever sit down and ask me how I felt? When did you ever look me in the eye and ask if your mother was actually happy? Oliver hung his head, utterly incapable of meeting my gaze. For 5 years, I have haunted the edges of my own life like a ghost, I continued, relentless. I have sat quietly in the next room while you mapped out a future that explicitly erased me. I have listened through the drywall as you plotted to ship me off to a state-run facility the minute I became too much of a chore. I have woken up every single morning feeling like toxic waste you couldn't figure out how to dispose of. Eleanor, I am so sorry. Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her own humiliation. I had no idea you were wealthy. If I had known... What, I barked, slicing her off. You would have treated me with basic human dignity. Is that really your grand apology? That you would have respected me if you knew my net worth could buy your respect? Chloe didn't say a word, but her suffocating silence was the only answer I needed. I pivoted back to Edward, who was watching the meltdown with a mix of professional horror and undeniable awe. Edward, I need you to immediately flag and cancel the corporate expense account I've been using to fund my family's lifestyle, I said, my voice dropping back to a calm, terrifyingly flat executive tone. Are you absolutely certain, Mrs. Vance? He asked, clearly stunned. Completely certain. You can't do that, Chloe screamed, pure survival panic hijacking her brain. How are we supposed to eat? How are we going to pay the water bill? I looked at her with a profound, icy calm that genuinely surprised me. The exact same way you planned on surviving before I moved into your basement, Chloe. On Oliver's honest, hard-earned salary. Oliver turned a new shade of translucent pale as his brain caught up to the reality that his six-figure job was a mirage. Also, I added, turning back to Edward, I need you to get Marcus Hayes on the phone this afternoon. Tell him our backdoor arrangement is officially terminated at the end of the month. What arrangement? Oliver choked out, though the terror in his eyes confirmed he already knew the punchline. The arrangement where I anonymously pay your corporate salary out of my own pocket, son. The 2 weeks that followed the explosion in the supermarket felt like waking up from a long, suffocating nightmare. For the first time in 5 years, I opened my eyes in the morning without the crushing weight of pretending to be a pathetic, helpless old woman. I packed my bags, walked out of the house I owned, and moved straight into a luxury penthouse in the most exclusive zip code in the city. Not to show off, but simply because I was finally free to live exactly as the woman I had built myself to be. Every morning, I drank my coffee out on the terrace, watching the sun rise over a skyline that my businesses helped build. Edward had executed my orders flawlessly. The corporate black card was dead. The phantom employment contract with Marcus Hayes was shredded, and my son and his wife were staring down the barrel of the real world for the first time in their adult lives. I hadn't heard a single peep from them since the meltdown in aisle 4, but I knew they would eventually show up. Desperation always drove them right back to my wallet, just like it always had. I was sitting behind the mahogany desk in my corporate suite, reviewing the quarterly profit margins, when my assistant Patricia buzzed the intercom. "Mrs. Vance, your son Oliver and his wife are in the lobby. They claim it is an absolute emergency." I let out a long, heavy sigh. I knew this reckoning was coming. But my heart still hammered against my ribs, dreading the emotional toll of what was about to walk through my door. "Send them in," I said, squaring my shoulders and sitting up perfectly straight. When they shuffled into my office, I barely recognized them. Oliver looked utterly destroyed, with dark, bruised bags under his eyes and a wrinkled, unwashed button-down shirt. Chloe, a woman who used to treat her reflection like a religion, had greasy, flat hair and was wearing the exact same sweatpants she had on in the supermarket. "Mom," Oliver started, his voice cracking instantly. "We really need to talk. Take a seat," I said smoothly, gesturing to the leather chairs opposite my desk. They sat down in total silence, their eyes darting around my corner office in shell-shocked awe. The floor-to-ceiling glass offered a sweeping million-dollar view of the downtown skyline, and the walls were plastered with framed industry awards and philanthropic plaques I had quietly collected over the decade. "Are all these awards actually yours?" Oliver asked, sounding like a confused child. "Businesswoman of the Year 3 years running," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly sterile. "The Civic Leadership Award. The Retail Innovation Trophy. Yes, Oliver, they are all mine." Chloe shifted awkwardly, the leather chair squeaking under her. "Eleanor, we came—" "Why? Because the gravy train derailed?" I cut her off instantly. "How long did the cash hold out?" Oliver stared at his shoes. 1 week. The day the card declined at the grocery store and Marcus called to terminate my position, we realized that we had absolutely nothing. Nothing, I asked, playing along with a script I already knew the ending to. "The deed to the house is in my name, but we found out the mortgage payments have been auto-drafting from your trust for years." Without those incoming transfers, Oliver swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "The bank just gave us a 60-day notice to cure the default, or they are foreclosing on the property. And the SUV lease was tied to your corporate account," Chloe mumbled, staring at her lap. "The repo guys took it out of the driveway last night." I leaned back in my chair, studying these two strangers who had held my sanity hostage for half a decade now, looking like lost, terrified children. "Do you want to know what the absolute saddest part of this entire tragedy is?" I asked softly. "It isn't that you came crawling in here begging for a bailout. It's the fact that it took you 14 days to even think about apologizing." "Mom, we are so incredibly sorry," Oliver blurted out, panic bleeding into his tone. "We know we made some terrible mistakes." Mistakes. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Oliver, for 5 straight years, you sat back and watched your wife degrade me, isolate me, and treat me like an unwanted stray dog. Those weren't slip-ups, son. Those were calculated, daily choices." Chloe finally forced herself to speak, her voice trembling violently. I just didn't know you had money. If I had known—" "We have already danced to this song, Chloe. You would have treated me like a human being, strictly because my bank account demanded it. That isn't love. That is just cheap opportunism. But we can fix this," Oliver pleaded, leaning forward over the desk. "We can start fresh, be a real family again." A real family. I repeated the phrase like it was a foreign concept. You mean like the time you told me my opinions on my own house didn't matter? Or like the time Chloe texted her country club friends praying I would drop dead so she could flip the property? Chloe flinched like she had been physically struck. Those texts. I was just venting. I didn't mean any of it. 5 years of texts, Chloe. 5 years of nonstop venting. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the traffic crawling below. Do you want to know what I figured out over the last 14 days? I didn't wait for them to guess. I figured out that the people on my payroll know my soul better than my own blood. Lucy, the girl working the register, sent a beautiful floral arrangement to my penthouse with a handwritten note, just checking on my blood pressure. Edward called me at home off the clock, just to make sure the bank transition went smoothly. I slowly turned around to face them. Total strangers who have interacted with me a dozen times in their entire lives have shown me more genuine compassion than the 2 people who slept under my roof for 5 years. "Mom, please," Oliver begged, hot tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "We are your family, aren't we?" I stood my ground. Family is not just a biological coincidence, Oliver. Family is built on mutual respect, unconditional love, and having each other's backs. You two were never my family. You were my wardens. Chloe shot up out of her chair, the desperation finally cracking into anger. "So what, you're just gonna throw us to the wolves? You're gonna sit up in this ivory tower and watch us lose everything?" "Chloe, you cannot lose what you never actually owned," I fired back, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "Every single thing you thought was yours belonged to me from day one." "But we are blood," Oliver insisted, his voice cracking. "You have a moral obligation to help us." "Do I?" I asked, tilting my head. "Where exactly was your moral obligation when I needed my only son to defend my dignity? Where was that blood loyalty when I was begging to feel loved and safe inside my own walls?" The silence stretched out between us, deep and hollow as a canyon. "I have made my final decision." I continued walking back behind my desk. "The deed to the house will remain in Oliver's name, but from this second forward, the mortgage is entirely your problem. The Bank of Eleanor is permanently closed." "And how exactly are we supposed to pay for it?" Chloe yelled, her mask completely slipping. "Oliver doesn't even have a job." "Then I highly suggest he logs on and finds a real one," I replied cleanly. "Or perhaps it is time you put a for sale sign in the yard and find an apartment you can actually afford." "That is unbelievably cruel," Oliver muttered, staring at the floor. "Cruel." I walked right up to the edge of the desk, leaning down until I was inches from his face. "Do you want to know what cruel really looks like? Oliver Cruel is reading text messages from your own daughter-in-law praying for your funeral. Cruel is isolating a grieving widow from her lifelong friends because she doesn't fit your aesthetic. Cruel is treating the woman who gave you life like a stray dog tracking mud on your rugs." Oliver couldn't hold my gaze for more than a second. "And there is one last piece of business we need to clear up." I continued, standing tall. "For 5 years, I didn't just sit quietly and watch how you treated me. I also paid very close attention to how you treated each other." Chloe and Oliver exchanged a sudden, terrified, paranoid glance. "Chloe, were you aware that Oliver has been carrying on multiple cyber affairs with women he meets in his online gaming lobbies? And Oliver, did you happen to know that Chloe has been sleeping with her Pilates instructor and quietly consulting a divorce attorney for the moment she finds a richer Mark?" The remaining blood completely drained from both of their faces, leaving them looking like 2 chalk statues. When you control the kind of capital and resources that I do, digging up the dirty truth on people is remarkably cheap. And the ugliest truth of all is that you two don't even love each other, let alone have the capacity to love me. "That is a total lie," Chloe protested, though her voice was barely a squeak. "No, it isn't, Chloe. The photos you sent your instructor were incredibly graphic. And Oliver, your deleted browser history paints a very different picture of the devoted, hard-working husband you pretend to be." They just sat there, frozen in a suffocating silence, finally cornered by the absolute ruin of their own toxic lives. "I will leave you both with this," I said, settling back into my leather chair. You have exactly two choices moving forward. You can learn to live in the real-world grind for an honest paycheck and start treating human beings with basic decency. Or you can keep walking down this toxic road and absolutely destroy each other. And you, Oliver asked, his voice completely defeated. What are you going to do? A genuine, effortless smile spread across my face for the first time since they walked through the door. I am going to live, Oliver. For the first time in 5 years, I am going to actually live my damn life. 6 months after the explosion in aisle 4 altered the trajectory of my entire existence, I was sitting on my penthouse terrace, savoring a perfect cup of morning coffee while thumbing through the quarterly retail reports. The numbers were staggering. Freed from the massive financial anchor of funding a lifestyle that brought me nothing but misery, my empire had expanded exponentially. The sharp buzz of the intercom pulled me out of the spreadsheets. It was Patricia, Mrs. Vance. You have a phone call on line 1. It's your sister Claire. I smiled warmly. Claire and I had completely rebuilt our bond the second I walked out of Oliver's house. She had been waiting patiently for half a decade for the real Eleanor to finally come back to life. Eleanor. Claire's booming, joyful voice filled the room through the speakerphone. How is my favorite corporate titan doing this morning? Never better, I answered. And for once, it was the absolute truth. How are the plans for our European trip coming along? Incredible. Those photos you sent of the Mediterranean cruise package were absolutely stunning. I still pinch myself that you are finally out there spending your hard-earned money. We had booked a 3-week luxury vacation for the following month. It was something I had dreamt of doing for years, but the plan was always killed because Chloe constantly invented reasons why my absence would ruin her schedule. Claire, do you remember when they literally banned me from visiting your grandkids because it was just too complicated to coordinate the driving? Of course I remember. I always knew in my gut that something sick was going on in that house. But every time I tried to pry, you just swore everything was fine. I was terrified, I admitted freely. I was terrified to look in the mirror and admit that I had completely surrendered control of my own destiny. All that matters now is that you took the wheel back, sister. After hanging up with Claire, I walked slowly through my penthouse, running my hands over the life I had curated for myself. Every piece of art, every throw pillow, every tiny detail was a reflection of the real me, not the muted, invisible ghost I had been forced to play for 5 years. My home office was plastered with photos from the trips I had taken over the last 6 months, Polaroids from wine dinners with friends I had finally reconnected with, and lanyards from charity galas, where I was finally allowed to step into the light. I also kept a stack of handwritten thank you notes from the local charities I was finally funding under my real name. The front doorbell chimed softly. 2 minutes later, Patricia appeared in the archway. Mrs. Vance, you have a visitor in the lobby. He says he is your son. My heart completely skipped a beat. It was the absolute first time Oliver had shown his face since the brutal reckoning in my office. Send him up, I said, but stay close to the door just in case. Oliver stepped out of the private elevator, and I instantly noticed the shift in his aura. He had dropped at least 15 pounds, but the bloated puffiness in his face was gone. He was wearing off-the-rack denim and a plain t-shirt, but they were clean, and for the first time in half a decade, he looked me dead in the eyes. Hi, Mom. Oliver. I stayed standing intentionally, not offering him a seat on the velvet sofa. I came, why? Because I really needed to tell you something in person. I just stood there, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Chloe and I finalized the divorce, he said, his voice steady but carrying a heavy, hollow sadness. 3 months ago. It didn't shock me in the slightest, but I didn't feel any vindictive thrill either, just a quiet, sobering sense of closure. How are you handling it? Liberated, he answered, brutally honest. Liberated and deeply, deeply ashamed. Ashamed of how blindly I walked through life, of how long it took me to see the monster I was sleeping next to, and the monster I was becoming. And the house? We sold it to an all-cash buyer. It was just way too much overhead to keep afloat. I finally swallowed my pride and got an entry-level job on a commercial construction site. I'm hauling lumber and starting at the absolute bottom, but the paycheck is real. For the first time since he stepped off the elevator, a tiny spark of genuine maternal pride flickered in my chest. "Where are you staying?" "I rent a tiny studio apartment down near the industrial district. It is basically a shoebox, but the lease has my name on it. Well, it's rented, but I pay the landlord with money I actually sweat for." We just stood there for a long minute, letting the hum of the city traffic fill the quiet room. "Mom, I know I surrendered the right to ask you for a damn thing, but I just want the privilege to come see you every once in a while. Not for a handout, not for a loan. Just because you are my mother and I really love you." His words cracked my armor, but 5 years of psychological warfare had taught me to keep my guard up. "Oliver, why today? Why did you wait 6 months to show up here?" "Because I needed the isolation to truly process the damage I caused. I needed to scrape by on minimum wage, without a safety net, to figure out what kind of man I actually am when I can't hide behind your wallet." He slowly sank onto the edge of the sofa, clearly exhausted. "These last 6 months have been the most brutal grind of my entire life, but they have also been the most authentic. Busting my back for 8 hours a day in the dirt, stressing over the electric bill, learning how to cook cheap pasta just to survive. All of that finally made me comprehend the sheer magnitude of what you sacrificed for us for 5 years. And what exactly did you comprehend, Oliver?" "I comprehended that we never once said thank you. We never acknowledged your sacrifice. We never once asked you if you were fulfilled or if you needed anything at all from us." Real, unscripted tears pooled in the corners of his eyes. "I finally realized that I wasn't your son for those 5 years, Mom. I was your executioner." The confession hit me like a physical blow to the ribs, but the raw honesty in his voice burned away a layer of resentment I didn't know I was still carrying. "Do you know what the true tragedy is, Oliver? It isn't the indignity I suffered. It's the fact that I lost 5 irreplaceable years of knowing who my son actually was. Can you ever forgive me?" The question just hung there in the sterile penthouse air, fragile and terrifying. "Oliver, forgiveness is not a magic switch you just flip on. It is a brick-by-brick foundation built day after day through consistent actions, not empty apologies." "I understand. Does that mean the door is permanently closed?" "It means that if you genuinely want to earn the title of my son again, it is going to take a very long time. It is going to require you showing up consistently and proving to me that the man sitting on my couch isn't a mirage." "How exactly do I start proving that?" "By knocking on my door strictly because you want my company, not my checkbook. By calling to ask about my day. By asking me what brings me joy. By looking me in the eye and telling me the brutal truth no matter what. And if I stumble, every human being on this earth stumbles. Oliver. The defining difference is having the spine to own the mistake and correct it, instead of burying it in excuses." He sat quietly for a long time, letting the gravity of my terms sink into his bones. "Would you mind telling me a little bit about your life now? How have you been spending these last 6 months?" The sheer normalcy of the question completely caught me off guard. It was the first time in a half-decade that anyone carrying my DNA had asked about my soul without a hidden agenda. "I have been thriving, Oliver. Truly thriving. I've been traveling the globe. I've reconnected with women I thought I had lost forever. I've aggressively expanded the corporate footprint, and I have been unapologetically living my truth for the first time in an eternity." "I am incredibly relieved to hear that, Mom. You look absolutely radiant. I feel radiant. Is there any room left in that beautiful new life for a flawed son who is desperately trying to rebuild himself?" I stared at the man sitting across from me intensely, scanning his posture, his eyes, the cadence of his voice, hunting for the subtle manipulation I had been trained to fear. But all I saw was stripped-down vulnerability, profound regret, and something I hadn't seen directed at me in years: pure respect. "Perhaps," I said softly, the ice finally cracking, "but you are going to have to bleed to earn it." "I understand completely. Could I possibly start by taking you out to dinner? I am actually cooking at my studio tonight. It is definitely not a 5-star restaurant, but the effort is completely honest." A small but profoundly real smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. I think I would really like that. When Oliver finally stepped back onto the elevator, I walked out onto my private terrace and watched the neon city lights bleed into the sunset. I couldn't guarantee that my son was permanently cured, or if this was just a highly sophisticated evolution of his old survival instincts. But for the very first time in years, a tiny, stubborn seed of hope took root in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could forge something real out of the ashes. But the most beautiful revelation of all was knowing that my joy was no longer tethered to his redemption. I had built a fortress of a life, rich and entirely self-sufficient. If Oliver proved himself worthy, there was a seat at my table. And if he failed, I was going to be perfectly fine walking this earth alone. At 67 years old, I had finally paid the ultimate price to learn the universe's greatest lesson. I deserved to be fiercely loved and respected, exactly as the powerhouse I was. I never had to shrink my soul or hide my fire just to make someone else comfortable. I was finally unconditionally free. And that kind of liberation, you simply cannot put a price tag on it.